My life was a predictable rhythm of work, routine, and everyday worries, until one ordinary morning, a sudden, inexplicable weakness brought me to my knees. In what felt like mere seconds, my perception of reality splintered, revealing a place both familiar and utterly alien. I thought I was dreaming, but then I woke up, only to return to that same impossible room again. What if death isn't the end, but merely a doorway to a consciousness far beyond anything we imagine?
Welcome back to A Profound Journey. Today, we're diving into Alan's incredible near-death experience, taking us from a mundane morning to an infinite room where consciousness operates on a different level. If these stories resonate, please subscribe and like this video. For our question today, what's a small moment or experience that unexpectedly brought you immense joy or peace? Share it in the comments below. Now, let's explore Alan's remarkable experience.
Before, life was a carefully constructed fortress of routine, where my biggest concern was a nagging knee injury from a run or what I'd have for breakfast at the mall. Before that day, my life was, for all intents and purposes, normal. I was Alan, a man in his late 30s navigating the everyday currents of modern existence. I lived in a comfortable suburban home, the kind with a neat lawn and friendly neighbors, just a short drive from the city. My days revolved around a pretty standard work schedule. The details aren't as important as the rhythm itself. It was a rhythm I had come to depend on, a predictable, almost comforting hum that filled my hours and shaped my expectations. I wasn't a thrill seeker, nor was I a recluse. I enjoyed the simple pleasures, an early morning run to clear my head, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, a quiet evening spent with my wife, watching a movie or just talking about our day. My character, I'd say, was fairly pragmatic. I valued logic, efficiency, and a good plan. Emotions, while present, were usually kept in check, rarely allowed to dictate my actions or throw me off course. My routine was my anchor, and I held on to it with a quiet determination. Looking back, there are fragments of my past that now seem to shimmer with a different light. Moments that perhaps hinted at a deeper yearning I wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. I remember one summer afternoon as a child, lying in a field of tall grass, watching the clouds drift by. I felt an incredible sense of peace, a fleeting connection to something vast and nameless. It was a feeling that vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the usual childhood concerns of scraped knees and dinner time. Then there was the loss of my grandfather when I was a teenager. It was my first real encounter with death, and it left me with a quiet, unarticulated unease. I went to the funeral, saw the grief, but the concept of gone forever felt like a blunt instrument, striking against a part of me that instinctively resisted such finality. I intellectualized it, of course, as we do with so many uncomfortable truths, burying the raw emotion under layers of adolescent stoicism. Emotionally, my daily life was a blend of contentment and an almost imperceptible undercurrent of something else. It wasn't happiness, not exactly, more like a quiet hum of unfulfilled potential, a subtle feeling that there was more to life than the predictable motions I was going through. I was happy enough, certainly. My marriage was stable, my career on track. Yet there were moments, often in the quiet of the night, when a question would surface. Is this all there is? It wasn't a cry of despair, but a whisper of curiosity, a faint echo of that childhood connection I'd felt in the field. I chased fleeting highs in small ways, a particularly challenging run or a perfectly executed project at work, but they never quite filled that quiet void. It was a search, I realize now, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time, for something more, something that transcended the mundane. My beliefs about life and death before that pivotal day were, in a word, conventional. I was raised Roman Catholic, but like many, my practice had become more a matter of tradition than fervent faith. I went to church on holidays, said grace before meals, but the deep theological concepts felt distant, abstract. Death to me was the end, a finite conclusion to a finite existence. There was no real contemplation of an afterlife, no vivid belief in a soul's journey. I considered myself a realist, perhaps even a gentle skeptic. The idea of something beyond the tangible world seemed improbable, a comforting story for those who needed it. I certainly didn't feel any pressing need for such comfort. Life was here, now, and when it ended, it simply ended. I was indifferent, not dismissive, but utterly unprepared for the profound, undeniable truth that was about to shatter my carefully constructed reality.
One moment, I was sipping coffee, planning my day, and the next, I was battling an unseen force, my body betraying me with every desperate step towards my car. May 18th, 2022. It started like any other Wednesday. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of light across our bedroom floor. I remember the familiar scent of coffee brewing and the quiet rustle of my wife getting ready for her day. My own schedule was fairly light that morning. I had a few hours to kill before my workday officially began. A perfect window, I thought, to tick off a few errands and grab some breakfast. My knee, which I'd strained during a run a few days prior, was still a little sore, a minor annoyance that barely registered on my radar. I drove to the local mall, the usual morning traffic a low hum on the radio. The air was crisp, the sky a clear, unthreatening blue. I parked, walked inside, and found a quiet spot for breakfast. I remember the simple pleasure of that meal, the warmth of the coffee cup in my hands, the taste of perfectly scrambled eggs. My mind drifted, making mental notes of the day's tasks, anticipating the comfortable rhythm of work. It was also utterly, reassuringly mundane. After breakfast, I decided to head to a pharmacy within the mall to find a better knee support. The ache in my knee had been a persistent reminder, and I figured it was time to properly address it. I browsed the aisles, looking at the various options, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was then, amidst the rows of brightly packaged remedies, that the first subtle shift occurred. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple, then another, and another. A sudden, intense heat enveloped me, an internal furnace roaring to life. My shirt began to cling to my back. Food poisoning, I thought, a mundane explanation for a very unsettling sensation. Perhaps that breakfast wasn't as harmless as it seemed. It was a fleeting, almost dismissive thought, quickly replaced by a growing discomfort. The feeling intensified rapidly. I abandoned my search for knee support, the sudden urge to get fresh air overriding everything else. As I stepped out of the pharmacy, the short walk back to my car, which was barely 50 meters away, transformed into an impossible marathon. My legs felt like lead, each step an excruciating effort. The sweat was pouring off me now, drenching my clothes, stinging my eyes. It was like running a race I hadn't trained for, every muscle screaming in protest. But there was no finish line in sight, only the oppressive weight of an invisible burden. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with the familiar exertion of a run, but with a frantic, desperate rhythm. I had to stop. Halfway to my car, I leaned against a pillar, my vision blurring at the edges, a dizzying blackness threatening to engulf me. This isn't just food poisoning, a small, rational part of my brain whispered. Something is seriously wrong.
There were no grand premonitions, no cryptic signs in the sky, no sudden flashes of insight that warned me of the precipice I was teetering on. Just the brutal, physical reality of my body shutting down. The world seemed to shrink to the immediate, terrifying sensation of my own failing physiology. The air grew heavy. The usual mall sounds, distant chatter, elevator music, faded into a dull drone. My focus narrowed to the desperate struggle for air, the overwhelming weakness that had stolen my very ability to move. Each breath was a conscious battle, each step an act of pure, agonizing will. Somehow, I made it back to the car. The drive home was a haze of blurring lines and a desperate grip on the steering wheel. My wife noticed immediately. Her calm demeanor shifted to one of concern as she saw my ashen face, my drenched clothes. I wanted nothing more than to collapse onto the sofa, to lie down and let whatever this was pass. But she insisted, with a quiet urgency that brooked no argument, that we go to the hospital. The short drive felt endless, each passing minute amplifying the internal chaos. My thoughts were fragmented, a jumble of confusion and a growing primal fear. What was happening to me? Was I dying? The word hung unspoken in the air, a chilling possibility. The tension in the car was palpable, the silent worry from my wife pressing down on me. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize, to cling to the idea that this was just a severe case of something mundane. But deep down, a cold dread had begun to set in. As soon as we arrived at the emergency room entrance, my legs gave out. The world tilted, spun, and then everything went black. The last thing I remembered was the cold, sterile floor rushing up to meet me, the muffled shouts of people, and the terrifying, definitive realization that I had lost control. The mundane had shattered, and I was about to be flung into something utterly beyond comprehension.
It was in that infinite room, with beings who seemed to ask why I was there, that I understood this was no dream, but a handover, an update on a life I hadn't realized was being observed. The collapse in the emergency room was not a mere fall. It was an abrupt, visceral cessation. One moment the cold tile floor rushed towards me, the next it was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging me into an instantaneous, profound darkness. There was no pain, no fear, just an immediate, absolute absence. It wasn't the slow fading of consciousness, but a sudden, stark discontinuity. My body, which minutes before had been a battlefield of agonizing symptoms, simply ceased to exist for my awareness. There was no sensation of leaving my body, no out-of-body vision of nurses rushing to my aid. Instead, it was as if my entire being had been instantaneously reconfigured, re-uploaded into a new, entirely different state of existence. Then, just as suddenly as the blackness, there was a shift. Not a light, not a sound, but a presence. I became aware, fully conscious, though not in the way I understood consciousness on Earth. It was a consciousness without a body, without physical senses, yet infinitely more lucid and expansive than anything I'd ever experienced. I found myself in a room. But room is a woefully inadequate word for what I perceived. It stretched infinitely in every direction. There were no walls, no discernible boundaries. It was a vast, boundless expanse, yet somehow contained, defined by its very limitlessness. Rows upon rows of tables and chairs, impossibly numerous, receded into the distance, suggesting an order to this ethereal space. The very fabric of this place felt calm, a profound sense of tranquility washing over me, erasing any lingering vestiges of earthly anxiety or physical discomfort. This was my first experience, a fleeting glimpse. I hadn't fully grasped its reality then. I dismissed it as a dream, a strange byproduct of my collapsing physical state. In this infinite room, I became aware of beings, not in the traditional sense of seeing distinct forms with eyes, but rather perceiving presences, fields of energy that resonated with an unmistakable intelligence. They were directly in front of me and to my right, perhaps 2 or 3 of them. There was no fear, no intimidation, only a profound sense of relaxed atmosphere. Their presence was not imposing, but inviting, gentle. One of these presences, the one closest to me, began to communicate. It wasn't through spoken words, but a direct, instantaneous transfer of thought, a telepathic communication that bypassed the need for language. The questions they posed were simple yet profound. What did you do? Where did you go? It wasn't an interrogation, but an update. I was recounting events from my life, moments, decisions, journeys. Not a life review in the traditional sense of seeing every memory flash before me, but a concise, impactful summary of key experiences, places, and times. It was as if I was providing data, a report on my earthly sojourn. The sheer normalcy of this exchange was startling, given the extraordinary circumstances. There was no judgment, no evaluation, just a quiet reception of information. It felt less like I was being judged, and more like I was simply fulfilling a necessary, almost bureaucratic step in an unknown process.
And then, as abruptly as I had arrived, I was pulled back. There was no light, no sensation of movement, just a sudden, jarring jolt. My awareness snapped back into something akin to my physical body, though still disoriented. I heard voices, faint and distant at first, then growing clearer. I was in an ambulance, lying on a stretcher. I started talking, asking what they had given me to make me so sleepy. Their response, a simple nothing, confused me. I felt overwhelmingly tired, and despite their urgent pleas to stay awake, I drifted off again. The switch flipped once more. My heart had stopped. This second descent into the unknown was different. The déjà vu was immediate and undeniable. I was back in the exact same infinite room, at the same table with the same two entities. This time, however, the perception was crystal clear. Why am I here again? This question echoed not with my earthly voice, but with the full conscious awareness of my non-physical self. The realization struck me like a bolt of pure knowing. This was not a dream. This was undeniably real, tangible in a way that surpassed any earthly reality. The clarity of this second experience illuminated the first, pulling it from the hazy realm of dreams into the undeniable light of truth. The two entities, those silent, knowing presences, turned to each other. It was a subtle shift, a momentary exchange of energy, but I understood it as clearly as if they had spoken aloud. He's back. We didn't expect him. There was no annoyance, no surprise, just a quiet acknowledgement of my unexpected return. Their attention then turned to me, not with questioning eyes, but with an almost telepathic shrug, as if to say, "Well, here you are again." This interaction, lasting what felt like only 2 seconds, was imbued with an unspoken meaning that resonated deeply within me. It cemented the reality of the situation, confirming that this was indeed a place and these were indeed beings that existed outside the confines of my earthly perception. The feeling of lightness and freedom in this infinite space was absolute. It was a sensation of unburdened existence, a complete liberation from the constraints of gravity, pain, and the mundane anxieties that had defined my life. I wasn't floating. I simply was, effortlessly present, boundless. There was an absolute calmness that permeated my being, a tranquility so profound it felt like the very essence of peace. It contrasted starkly with the chaotic struggle of my physical body just moments before. On Earth, movement was effort. Here, it was effortless. Thoughts were sometimes clouded by emotion. Here, they were pristine, clear. This freedom wasn't merely physical, it was a boundless expanse of consciousness. While there were no deceased relatives or specific religious figures, the presence of these entities, these people, as I perceived them in their non-physical form, was deeply significant. They were not beings of light in the traditional sense, but they were certainly composed of a different kind of energy, one that radiated quiet intelligence. Communication was entirely telepathic. There were no spoken words, no facial expressions, yet understanding was instantaneous and complete. It was less like a conversation and more like a direct download of information or an intuitive knowing. There was no need for my terrestrial mind to process language. The meaning was simply there.
They didn't offer explicit messages or warnings in the way a human might. Instead, the handover itself was the message. It was a recognition of my journey, a collection of the data of my life. The unspoken lesson was the importance of experience, of the path taken, the choices made, the places visited. It was as if every moment of my life, every interaction, every decision was a piece of information, a data point in a grander design. This wasn't about right or wrong, good or bad, but simply about the accumulation of conscious existence. The profound implication was that life itself, in all its messy complexity, was a form of ongoing record-keeping, a continuous flow of information being gathered and processed. There was no panoramic life review, no rapid-fire montage of past events, but the very act of updating them, of relaying the specifics of my earthly existence, forced a subtle, subconscious reevaluation of my life. It wasn't a judgment from them, but an internal one. As I relayed where I had been and what I had done, a new perspective began to form. My mundane routine, which I had taken for granted, now felt like a sequence of deliberate choices, each leading to the next. The casual interactions, the fleeting thoughts, the larger life decisions, all seemed to hold a greater weight, a quiet significance I had never noticed. It wasn't a sudden flood of revelation about my purpose, but a dawning understanding that every step I took contributed to the data I was presenting. The most profound, most undeniable aspect of this experience was a quiet yet pervasive sense of unity. It wasn't a dazzling light or an overwhelming surge of emotion, but a deep, fundamental understanding that I was one with everything. The infinite room, the silent entities, even the data of my own life, it all felt interconnected, part of a single, indivisible whole. This wasn't an emotional outpouring of love in the human sense, but a recognition of interconnectedness, a quiet harmony that underpins all existence. It was a knowing that removed all sense of separation, all boundaries between me and not me. My individual consciousness, while still distinct, felt like a single note in a vast cosmic symphony. This quiet unity permeated every fiber of my non-physical being, a profound peace born from absolute belonging. The knowledge I gained wasn't delivered in lectures or revelations. It was inherent in the very structure of the experience. The handover implied a continuous process, a greater context for my individual life. The "why are you here again" from the entities suggested a cycle, a recurring pattern. The understanding that permeated me was about the nature of reality itself, that consciousness persists beyond the physical form, that there is a vast, ordered space beyond our immediate perception, and that our earthly lives, mundane as they may seem, are significant data points in an incomprehensibly larger system. It wasn't about God in a religious sense or rebirth in a dogmatic way, but about the fundamental continuity of awareness, the interconnectedness of all things, and the quiet, pervasive harmony that is the bedrock of existence. My earthly understanding of a finite life ending in oblivion was shattered, replaced by an intuitive grasp of an ongoing, interwoven reality. It was a silent, powerful truth, absorbed not through thought, but through direct, undeniable experience.
One moment, I was bathed in the quiet certainty of that infinite room, and the next, I was yanked back, slammed into a world of jarring noise and the crushing weight of a body I no longer recognized. The return was not a gentle transition. It was a brutal, instantaneous rupture. There was no fading light, no gradual re-entry. It was as if I was violently torn from that realm of boundless consciousness and slammed back into the confines of my physical body. The impact was jarring, a visceral shock. One moment, absolute calm and effortless existence. The next, the crushing weight of gravity, the dull ache of an unfamiliar body, and the overwhelming noise of the ambulance. My first sensation was a profound disorientation. Where was I? The infinite room, with its quiet intelligences and boundless expanse, had been my reality just a microsecond before. Now, my eyes flickered open to the sterile, confined space of an ambulance. The fluorescent lights seemed blindingly harsh, the sirens a piercing assault on my ears. And then came the physical sensations. A pervasive weakness, as if every ounce of strength had been leached from my limbs. My chest felt tight, my breath ragged. There was no intense pain in that immediate moment, but a deep, unsettling heaviness, a stark contrast to the weightlessness I had just experienced. It was like being forcibly stuffed back into a suit of armor after having floated freely. My first conscious thought was not relief, but a bewildering confusion. "What happened?" I remember asking, my voice a croak. Then came the sudden, chilling realization. I was just there. The memory of the infinite room, the tables, the calm presences, flashed with absolute clarity. But how could it be real? I tried to make sense of it, to reconcile that undeniable experience with the jarring reality of the ambulance. I remember looking at the emergency medical technicians around me, their faces a blur of urgent activity. I asked them again about the sleepiness, about what they had given me. Their answer, "Nothing," resonated with the new, terrifying significance. Because if they hadn't given me anything, and I had indeed gone offline twice, then what I had experienced was not a dream, but something else entirely. My physical body felt alien. It was slow, heavy, and unresponsive. My head swam, my vision occasionally blurring at the edges. I was aware of the subtle tremors running through my muscles, the cold sweat still clinging to my skin. The sheer vulnerability of my physical form was now painfully apparent, a stark contrast to the boundless freedom of the other realm.
The EMTs, accustomed to the raw drama of life-or-death situations, were remarkably composed, but their faces held a subtle tension. I heard snippets of their conversation. He had a heart attack, blocked artery. We had to shock him. That last phrase, delivered so matter-of-factly, landed with the force of a physical blow. Shocked me? My mind struggled to process it. I hadn't felt the shock, hadn't registered anything beyond that instant shift. It was then that the gravity of my situation truly began to sink in. I had been dead. My heart had stopped. Twice. Later in the hospital, the reactions from doctors and nurses were equally telling. There was a professional calm, a focus on the medical facts, my vitals, the scans, the procedures. But when I haltingly tried to describe the infinite room, the telepathic exchange, their polite smiles barely masked their skepticism. It was clear they saw it as a residual effect of the trauma, a neurological quirk. "Your brain went through a lot," one doctor said gently, a dismissive wave of his hand. My wife, visibly shaken by the ordeal, listened with a mixture of concern and a quiet bewilderment. She tried to be supportive, but I could see in her eyes that she struggled to grasp the enormity of what I was trying to convey.
How could I explain a reality that transcended all known laws of physics and perception? My attempts to share were met with an almost universal incomprehension. It wasn't outright disbelief, but a subtle shifting of gazes, a slight awkwardness in their responses. It felt like I was speaking a language no one else understood. The stark contrast between the profound, undeniable reality of my experience and the dismissive, rationalizing responses of those around me was isolating. It was as if I had glimpsed an undeniable truth, only to return to a world that stubbornly insisted on its limited, material version of reality. The joy of that profound unity I felt in the infinite realm was now tinged with the frustration of being unable to adequately convey its truth to others. It was a heavy burden, the weight of an incredible secret that no one seemed ready to accept.
My old life, once a carefully planned itinerary, shattered into a million pieces, revealing a landscape I never knew existed. The world looks different now, infused with a quiet understanding that transcends what my eyes can see or my hands can touch. Life after that day, May 18th, 2022, is less a continuation and more a complete recalibration. The man who collapsed in the emergency room was not the same man who eventually walked out. The experience, though brief in earthly time, had irrevocably altered the very fabric of my being. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic conversion, but a slow, profound unraveling of everything I thought I knew, replaced with something far more expansive and undeniable. My priorities shifted almost immediately. The relentless pursuit of material comforts, the meticulous planning of my career trajectory. These things, once central, now seemed trivial, almost absurd. The endless pursuit of more, the small worries that once consumed my thoughts, they simply faded into insignificance. What truly mattered now was the quality of connection, the depth of human interaction, and the quiet appreciation for the simple act of being. I found myself less interested in accumulating possessions and more interested in experiences, in moments of genuine presence. My relationships, particularly with my wife, became a crucible. The chasm between my experience and her inability to fully grasp it, despite her best efforts, grew wider. It was a silent, aching disconnect. I tried to articulate the infinite room, the sense of unity, the silent communication, but the words felt hollow, inadequate. Her attempts to rationalize it, to attribute it to a medical event, were understandable, but they stung. We grew apart, not out of anger or animosity, but because we were suddenly living in different realities. Eventually, our marriage, which had been a stable anchor in my previous life, quietly dissolved. It was a painful loss, but a necessary one, as I realized I couldn't go back to pretending that the world was still the same. My work, too, felt different. The passion I once had for my profession, the drive for achievement, diminished. It wasn't that I stopped caring, but the stakes felt profoundly changed. The mundane stresses of deadlines and corporate politics seemed insignificant when compared to the vastness I had witnessed. I started to seek out roles that offered more direct human interaction, where I felt I could genuinely contribute to something beyond mere profit margins. My interests gravitated towards the intangible, towards philosophy, consciousness studies, and the profound questions of existence that I had once casually dismissed. My beliefs about life, death, and everything in between underwent a radical metamorphosis. Before, I was a non-practicing Catholic, a gentle skeptic who believed death was the definitive end. Now I understand with an absolute, undeniable certainty that consciousness persists. The infinite room was not a hallucination, it was a reality, a realm beyond our physical perception. Death is not an ending, but a transition, a doorway. I don't subscribe to any specific religious dogma. My experience wasn't adorned with angels or saints. Instead, it was an encounter with a pure, undeniable intelligence and an overwhelming sense of interconnectedness. My new philosophy is rooted in this understanding of unity. We are all part of something infinitely larger, a vast, interwoven tapestry of existence. Every action, every thought, every interaction ripples through this interconnected web. The handover experience, the subtle, "Why are you here again?" implied a continuous journey, a purposeful accumulation of experience. It was not about judgment in a punitive sense, but about the inherent value of conscious living, of gathering data through our experiences. This isn't about some distant, judgmental God, but about an underlying, intelligent fabric of reality that encompasses everything.
The concept of the soul became real to me, not as a religious construct, but as the enduring core of my consciousness, that part of me that navigated the infinite room and communicated with those entities. It's an energy, an awareness that transcends the physical body and continues its journey beyond what we perceive as life and death. The meaning of life, for me, is no longer about earthly achievements, but about the accumulation of conscious experience, the quiet understanding of our place within this vast, harmonious unity. I haven't embarked on a grand mission or become a spiritual guru. My purpose now is more subtle, more integrated into my everyday existence. It's about living authentically, in alignment with the profound truths I was shown. It's about fostering genuine connections, speaking from a place of quiet knowing, and approaching life with an open heart. I share my story carefully when the moment feels right, not to convince, but to offer a different perspective. I found myself drawn to communities, both online and off, where others have had similar experiences, seeking to understand and validate these profound shifts in consciousness. There's a quiet sense of obligation to bear witness, to acknowledge the reality of what happened, not just for myself, but for anyone else who might be grappling with similar questions. It's a mission of quiet truth-telling, offering a whisper of the infinite to those who might be ready to hear it. Integrating this experience into ordinary life has been, and continues to be, profoundly challenging. The primary difficulty is the sheer incommunicability of it. How do you describe an infinite room to someone who has only known walls? How do you convey telepathic understanding to someone whose entire reality is built on spoken words? The misunderstanding from family and friends, while often gentle, was isolating. I learned to choose my words carefully, to share only what felt appropriate, and to accept that many would never truly grasp the depths of what I had been through. There were moments of existential crisis, periods of feeling profoundly alienated from the mundane world. The trivial concerns of daily life could sometimes feel suffocating, like a heavy blanket after the lightness of that other realm. It was a constant balancing act, living in this world, participating in its routines, while holding the profound, unwavering truth of another. I sometimes felt like an observer, watching the dance of earthly life unfold, knowing there was so much more beyond the stage. The challenge has been to find harmony between these two realities, to live fully in the present while carrying the wisdom of the infinite. My journey through the gates of the unknown shattered my reality, then meticulously reassembled it brick by brick with the undeniable truth of eternal consciousness. The greatest lesson, the most profound insight is this: there is no true end. There is only transition, transformation, and an ongoing interconnected dance of awareness. We are not merely isolated beings. We are threads in an infinite tapestry, each experience a unique pattern contributing to the grand design. I stand before you not as someone who merely believes in an afterlife, but as someone who has, in a very real sense, been there. This journey has left me with an unshakable sense of peace, a quiet knowing that permeates every aspect of my life. Fear of death has vanished, replaced with an inherent trust in the unfolding of existence. My hope for you, the viewer, is not to necessarily believe every word I say, but to open your mind, even just a crack, to the possibility that there is more to this existence than meets the eye. That perhaps within the mundane rhythms of our daily lives lie whispers of the infinite, waiting to be heard, and that even in our darkest moments, in the face of what appears to be an end, There is only a boundless continuation.
Alan's account of being re-uploaded and communicating telepathically in an infinite room is truly one of the most compelling we've heard, particularly the detail of returning to the same place a second time. It really makes you wonder about the nature of consciousness itself. If Alan's journey resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more incredible accounts. And for our discussion question related to Alan's experience, Alan describes his life as data points for the entities in the infinite room. How does this perspective of our lives being recorded or having larger significance resonate with you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope Alan's profound insights offer you a new perspective today.